Hello, community members. Welcome to our Ancestral Institute. My name is Antoine Craigwell, and we are in the second in our series, the Ancestral Institute, Rituals and Wellbeing, Culture as it Intersects with Psychology, will be presented by Thembeka Sdinane, for a research and doctoral candidate of psychology at Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. I know it's like about 4 o'clock in the afternoon there in South Africa, and it's about 10 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast in the US, and about 7 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast in the US. So we'd like to welcome you all. And I know that Thembeka has just shared her presentation with us. And it looks exciting. It looks very informative. And I am really and truly looking forward to seeing and hearing about how rituals and well-being as culture as it intersects with psychology. More importantly, the second of this web series leads up to our Ancestral Institute that we'll be gathering in Puerto Rico on November 8th to the 10th, in partnership with the University of Puerto Rico, the Gender Studies Department and the Gender and Sexuality Department, as well as with Casa Ruth in the Rio Piedras district in Puerto Rico, in San Juan. So this is all building up and gearing towards that. And I must share with you that last week, we had a rather exciting and encouraging conversation with some Taino elders. And the Tainos were the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and some of the other Greater and Lesser Antilles in the Caribbean. And these elders, they were on board, they were excited, and they're fired up to be part of the Institute in November. So this entire webinar series leads up to that, because what we're trying to do here with this Ancestral Institute is to bridge and to find a common ground that Black and people of color can identify, where we can see in our traditional rituals and practices that our ancestors took care of themselves and each other. And we know that contemporaneously, many in our current communities do not identify with the Western European, the American psychological paradigm. And so that creates a bit of a disconnect. So we're not getting the care and the attention that we need. And so knowing that our ancestors have perfected and refined ways and means of taking care of themselves and each other, and that these are embedded in our DNA, it's time that we reconnect with who we are. It's time we return and reconnect and cut out that what I call the great interruption that erased our ancestors from us, and reconnect with who our ancestors were, the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, and learn from them and tap into ourselves for our own healing and to help heal others in our communities. And so with that being said, I would now like to hand it over to Thembeka, who will introduce herself. Thembeka, and like I said just now, I do not want to mess up pronouncing your last name, because your last name is part of your identity, it's part of your culture, it's part of who you are. So please go ahead and introduce yourself. Community members, here is Thembeka. Thembeka.
Thank you, Antoinette. And as you've introduced me, my name is Thembeka Sdinane. I do know that my surname is quite difficult for people who are not of the Nguni nation to pronounce. So for today and for this minute, I'll excuse a lot of people. But in terms of my name, it's Thembeka, and you pronounce the TH how you pronounce temptation. So that's the pronunciation. And I'm so happy to be here today and to share my current study, my PhD, which is on rituals and well-being. I know that you have allocated an hour and 30 minutes, but I'm not sure if we'll get there. I'm just hoping that out of the presentation, there would be some bit of engagement. So I'm open to having a lot of time engaging with the attendees, just to hear their thoughts and to share the same thoughts. So I'll go on and I'll just project my my presentation, and then take you through it, and hoping that I'm gonna go into the right one and share. Okay. Oh yeah. Let me disconnect the screen because it's giving me problems now. Just there we go. Okay. And I would please love to invite people to leave their thoughts on the chat box. If they've got any question that they need to ask me, they can leave it in the chat box, and when the presentation is done, we would just go comment by comment, I think, to... Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate this thing. Okay. I'm not seeing any activity on my side in terms of if somebody is raising a hand or something. So if there's somebody who's raising a hand, or there's any urgent comment, or something that a comment to make before I proceed, just feel free to unmute and let me know. Otherwise, I'm not seeing a lot of activity. And before I proceed, I would love to thank Professor Ally. I saw that he's in the room with us, who's my supervisor and who's guided me through this PhD journey. So just a brief introduction into who I am, and the interest on culture and psychology, as well as my understanding about culture and where does it fit in psychology. And I'll just before we start, I'll just position myself in relation to the study, so that when I'm moving and I am exploring, or I am discussing certain aspects, you know where or the perspective in which I am coming from. So my name is Thembeka, and if you are not if you are not South African, or you don't understand any of the Nguni languages, it means she who is trustworthy. So you can trust my presentation today. And I am from South Africa, in the province of the Eastern Cape. And I was born from two diverse cultures. So my background is diverse to begin with. My mom is from the Basotho Nation, and my father is from the Amaxhosa. So already my upbringing has kind of exposed me to having to navigate diversity. In my interest in culture and psychology, I did my undergrad in psychology, and I remember in this one class, I think it was personality psychology class, we were learning about all these theories around personality and how it develops and everything that has to do with human development. And at the end of that textbook, there was an inch of section, and it was written African Perspectives in Personality. And throughout my undergrad and my courses, I've learned all that I about human behavior and psychology and mental health care. And none of it has centered the people that gave birth to me. It has not centered the voices of where I come from. And as a Black female growing up, who grew up in the villages and got exposed to now, the urban life when I came into varsity, and, you start to have questions about where are you represented in the literature, where do you fit in psychology? So I understand culture as a way of being. It shapes who you are as a person, and it is passed down generationally. So it's not a static concept. It is constantly evolving as the times are evolving. And it fits so well with psychology, because psychology has to deal with human behavior. It has to deal with human cognition. It has to deal with the developing human within a certain context. And it needs to be centered in theory. It needs to be centered in practice. It needs to be centered in how we do research, because not centering it is doing more harm than good. And therefore, if we are to offer, or if we are to speak about psychology as a helping profession, then we need to interrogate the injustices that that psychology has brought, especially into the marginalized community. And I'm saying marginalized community in quotations, if you can see me, because it's marginalized, but not really marginalized. It's when you think about the application of psychology in our context, there's so much injustice in terms of psychology is a minority. It represents the minority, yet it is so dominant that the majority has to accommodate it. And so my interest around culture and researching about culture stems from that background. And I started with my master's, which looked at cultural competence in psychological interventions, all supervised by Professor Yaseen Ally as well. And we had, as a master's project, you always think about it in the context of you being a master's student. So from there on, we actually, I remember saying to Professor Ali, I feel like I was speaking about cultural competence, but I was still centering the voice of the dominant Eurocentric framework. So for my PhD, I'm just going to do something a bit different, and I am going to center the voices of the African people. I'm going to center the voices of the Black people in my community. And hence my focus on religious rituals and psychological well-being, specifically looking at the people that are living in rural communities. And so I position myself in this study because firstly, it is a study that I feel like I'm studying myself. It's a study of the self, because the communities that I went into when I conducted the study, the communities where I grew up, where I have family and where my family has got relations in, and the population or the research site, which is the church, is the church that I grew up in, and I still go to church to this day. And during the research process, I had to center my language in a manner that when I speak about psychological well-being later on, you will realize that I've conceptualized it using two native South African languages, isiXhosa and Sesotho, so that I produce, or so that I actually research and I situate my research within the context of the people that I'm speaking to. And also in terms of the relationship with religion, growing up in a religious household, and you being almost prescribed a certain way of being and a certain way of living, and always wondering what the benefit of that is, and always questioning, or to say, where does this fit in? And later on, as a psychology professional, wanting to merge the two worlds and see what is it that I've learned as somebody who grew up in a religious household, who's a psychology professional, but who's also very much keen on centering the voice of African people in psychology today. So that's just my brief, if it's brief, background on why the focus, especially on rituals and well-being. So I think this platform that we are in, that first point, that the role of indigenous knowledge systems within psychology or within mental health care at large has been an area that is overlooked. And we know that there's some diversities in terms of how we view reality, as well as how we produce knowledge, especially related to how health and well-being is conceptualized and understood. And this has led to some disparities that we note in the scholarship of psychology, especially when it comes to addressing mental health care in the context of African people. And you see this being mostly prevalent or highly concerning, especially in rural areas where traditional belief systems are central in the individual's ways of being, right? And these ways of being, I look at them and I'm saying they're intertwined in the African cosmology, as well as their view of reality and how they produce that reality. And by that I'm emphasizing mostly the African cosmology of being in harmony with nature. So a person it needs to be in harmony with themselves, with the environment that they're living in, as well as the spiritual realm in which they also exist as living beings. And so in the scholarship of psychology, or when you're reading something or you are in discussions around indigenous healing methods, amongst dominant Eurocentric psychology professionals, you always hear about indigenous healing methods as alternative methods, right? But in this study, we argue that indigenous healing methods are not alternative. They're not complementary to the biomedical care. They are a way of healing that individuals in the South African or in the African context, or Black people, have used before psychology became what it is today. And if you look at the history of psychology in South Africa, it does not have a good history. It was introduced, in around the 1970s, and one of the people who were key in upholding the apartheid regime, which is Verwoerd, was actually a psychologist who was integral in if I can say, making psychology a profession that outside of philosophy. So from the get-go, psychology has never been in favor of the Black people. And you see that a lot of negative connotation is associated with indigenous healing methods, right? And so we say that psychology, it strives to be dominant, and it totally ignores the role of indigenous knowledge systems because it wants to keep, perpetuating its own view of what it is to be a human being in the world. And these are the key issues and key voices and key debates that are central in what the African scholars calls the relevance debate. So how is psychology is relevant to the needs of African people, right? And these are some of the issues that decolonial scholars are bringing up, as well as Afrocentric scholars. They also bring up these issues. And within in the broader perspective of indigenous knowledge systems scholars that are calling for the reimagination of professions, psychology included. So as I said, we center the study to represent the voice of the marginalized in mental health care, who don't have the same conception of reality as the universally dominant conception of what it is to be a human being in the world. And so when I think about psychological well-being, how will that be conceptualized? I had to think about the people that I am going to be talking to, and I had to find a concept, and I have to put psychological well-being in a manner that they're going to understand it, And so there is a concept within the context of Black people, or even especially in the church. And in isiXhosa it's called Uphila Emoyeni, and Sesotho it means Uphila Moyeng. And what that means is that Uphila is to be well, and then Emoya, Moya could be something that is psychological. Umoya can be an emotion, and umoya can be a spirit, as well as umoya can be a wind, but I'm not gonna go into detail about that. So with us conceptualizing psychological well-being as Uphila Emoyeni, we acknowledge that psychological well-being is intertwined with psychological dimensions, with emotional as well as the spiritual realm, right? And we do this because we want to respect the population that we are researching, because this is a concept that is already existing in their vocabulary. But we also acknowledge the importance of situated knowledge, to say, if we are researching psychological well-being in the rural areas, then we need to ask them about psychological well-being in a manner that they understand, and in a manner that they conceptualize psychological well-being. So we had to dig and think about, how do people conceptualize psychological well-being? What are some of the aspects that that would define, or that would highlight how people view psychological well-being? And we go back to the cosmology of the African people in terms of the holistic view of health and well-being, of health and well-being, in that one has to be in harmony with nature as well as the spiritual realm for them to be well. And so for psychological well-being, one may not say they are psychologically well if they are not emotionally well, or if they are not spiritually well. So we may not study psychological well-being in isolation. We have to look at what are the emotions involved, what are some spiritual aspects that are involved in this, right? And we have to acknowledge the influence of socio-cultural factors as well as socio-ecological factors. And by that, I mean that, for example, the access to mental health care services, they're very dominant biomedical care. They're not accessible to the people in the rural areas. They're not affordable to the people in the rural areas, but they're not relative as well, because they don't really center their cultural context, in that their view of certain things and the meaning that they associate to certain things totally differs to the view that that the black people in South Africa, especially in rural areas, associate with certain things. So you can think about for example, some of I'm gonna a brief or a well-known phenomenon in South Africa is psychology, like psychosis versus ancestral calling, right? They've got very similar symptoms, and psychology is very quick to label it as a pathology, as opposed to the African people, where somebody is has an ancestral calling and they have those symptoms. They don't have looked at also the concept of relationality to say, view their well-being in relations to others, right? And so we found that most studies within the African context, they would conceptualize psychological well-being in a very relational manner to say, I am well if my people are well. So if the community around me is well, if the society around me is well, and if my family is well. So there's a lot of emphasis in terms of kinship and family for one to be able to be well. So we then acknowledged that if we are to study psychological well-being in the context that we studied it in, we have to take into account these factors. And so in terms of rituals, when I think about rituals in this study, I looked at them as a rite of passage. And this is to say that they highlight a transition in one's life, right? And it's continuum from life to death. And they serve they are very communicative in nature, in that they communicate what is expected, what is to be done. So if you think about rituals, for example, naming rituals, it's common ritual that different cultures in South Africa conduct, and they are conducted according to that cultural way of being. So it might be that AmaZulu and AmaXhosa or Basotho, they have the same ritual of naming a child, but it's conducted very differently. But what that means, it communicates a message that you are introducing your baby to your ancestors, to those who have lived before you. And so I looked at rituals within the church as well in the same context to say, what are those rituals that are enacted as rite of passages, but they've got psychological benefits in terms of enhancing well-being. And I will share some rituals in the few slides that are coming that participants reflected on. And I also look at rituals as a sense of meaning, right? You conduct rituals, or rituals are enacted to co-create meaning together, and to share certain beliefs about a phenomenon, or they are conducted as a tradition, or they are conducted as, to share meaning in terms of what are some behavioral customs that the people share. And in this case, they can also serve as a defense mechanism. And if you think about, for example, dance rituals for trauma, where maybe the therapist or a psychologist would refer client for that. So it's also, it's not only a sense of meaning, but it's psychologically it's a defense mechanism, or it's a protective factor, or it's an expression, because through ritualized behavior, there's an emotion that is evoked, and so there's a bit of protection as well that comes with that. And I look at rituals as social connection, right? In that it is a collective responsibility. They are conducted to regulate connections, and so you find that it gives people a sense of belonging and community, to say, if I as maybe a member of the Zionist church do this ritual, then I feel that I'm a member of the church. I belong in this in this church, and I've built myself community. And I also looked at them as, the transcendent, and it's that it fosters a sense of spiritual connection, right, to which that is bigger than yourself. So when we look at those rituals, they embody the spirit. So the embodiment of umoya, or spirit, in, like, for example, healing rituals. They can reflect ritual activity, right, that goes beyond the normal observable manifestation. And I think about when a spiritual healer, when a traditional healer, or whoever is spiritually inclined goes into trance, right, while conducting a ritual. That is something that psychology may not be able to explain, because psychology depends on that which is measurable, or something that we can observe, right? But when you think about rituals as a way of connecting to the spiritual side, there's no way that you can observe, or there's no way that you can measure that. So such activity, it only somebody who's in that state of mind, or who's in trance, is able to explain what is happening during that period. So I look at rituals from that perspective as well. And just before, I don't know, I know that we are, that in terms of positionality, I positioned language. So I know that one, I need to clarify in terms of the Zionist churches in South Africa. They are part of the African independent churches, and they were formed as they were quite a Protestant movement, really, against how colonialism had introduced Christianity into the African context. So they still uphold, the traditional African practices or expressions, and they still uphold their traditional beliefs in conjunction with Christian beliefs. So just to have a disclaimer that the Zionist in this study is no way linked to the political Zionist movement that is currently, doing crime against humanity in Palestine. And those pictures, that's myself and my parents. They are produced with permission from me. So I can't speak on behalf of my parents. I just put them there, but it's just the representation of some of the garments that, or the izambatho, I would prefer to say it that way, that we wear at church. And so I I focused on the Zionist church rituals because of their syncretic approach. And by that, I mean that they still have Christian influence, but it's the way that they practice and the way that the meanings associated with certain rituals, they still adhere to the African traditional practices. And so the Zionist Church has managed to successfully merge the Christian and African ideologies together in terms of how they preach the word, in how they teach Christianity, and how they enact or act out Christianity. And mostly because of that, it's one of the churches that has a focus on spiritual healing. And they have what we call abatandazeli, spiritual healers, as well as abaprofeti, for example. And those are the people that mostly heal using water or water and herbs, depending on the person's preference. And it is accessible to most people in the rural areas. And it's actually one of the churches that most people go to when they want help. People either have an option, like, for example, to go to traditional healers or spiritual healers, and it's very accessible, and not only to the members that belong to the church, but to the wider community. It is accessible. And for this presentation, I've chosen to focus on 3 rituals that were highlighted in the study, and that is isikuko, which is it's basically a prophetic prayer. There's various water rituals that were highlighted, as well as uklambulula, which is cleansing. So for today, I think I'm just going to focus on those 3. I don't know if there's any comment or question that I can take at this point before I move to the next slide. Antoinette, you can just tell me if there's something that I need to.
I don't see any comments or questions in the chat as yet. I think maybe attendees are probably just absorbing all of this valuable information that you're sharing. So yes, please go ahead. I don't see any comments or questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I start off with isituko, and I just put one quote that I extracted from the conversations that I had with my participant. And English really did not do us justice in this study in terms of expressing the deeper spiritual connection of some things that the participants were saying. And I had to make the decision to put in the final document, in the thesis document, to put those extracts that I thought that I need to put this in the language that the participant expressed it in, and then I'll put in the translation after that, because without the original language or the native language that the participant responded in, it didn't do justice. So this was one of those extracts where the person said that they requested iskuko, and because they were not well, and they could see that something was not well. And so because they knew that when they seek help at the church, it is always available. And when I interpret that, I have to think about the purpose of isiGuqo. What is it, and why is it so important for this person to request it when they're not well? And basically, it's a prophetic prayer, as I said, and it's a prayer that is used to almost diagnose in clinical language the root of burdens of somebody, as well as offer solutions or offer interventions or advice on what needs to be done, right? And only certain people in the church can do the reading. And that will be the prophets in the church or abatandazeli, right? And during that ritual, it's very there's an importance that is placed in terms of where the ritual is conducted and how it is conducted. And you often see that it is characterized by very fast-paced songs and rhythms. And the songs that are sang, they have to be centered around healing. So any song, they have to be centered around healing, and they have to be centered around umoya. So you'll find that a lot of the songs that are being sung during that time, they speak to the spirit, or they speak about healing. And they can either be done in the church or in the homestead. So for example, for people who are not who cannot afford maybe having the church people come to their homestead to have an all-nighter of the service, they can opt for they can ask that the ritual be conducted in church, and it will be announced that maybe the following Sunday it is isiGuqo Skabanbani, so isiGuqo for maybe, let's say, Thembeka in this case. And can I ask somebody to mute, please? And can someone mute the person who's speaking? Thank you. And so it will be announced in church that we're having isiGuqo for Thembeka, and the service for that day would be dedicated towards that purpose. And so the preparation towards the ritual is also important for its success. Hence, that's why I said there's only certain people that can do the reading, and there's also some common knowledge in terms of during the English now, during the rhythm. I'm gonna call it dancing now because I don't have the English word for it. So during the dancing around the person during the reading, there's certain, you have to be in a certain standing in terms of your spiritual standing. So if you know that you are not fine and your spirit is not clear at that moment, you may not form part of that, because then it's going to affect the other people, and it's going to affect the ritual. So the preparation towards the ritual is also very important. And this was one of the ritual that was highlighted, and they said that the benefit of this is, like, you know that something is wrong, but you don't know what is it that is wrong, and it offers you the root of burden, and there's always a direction afterwards. So if maybe it's something that has to do with they will say maybe, let's say, witchcraft, for example, because the church actually does not believe in issues like witchcraft, ancestors, and so forth. So they would then maybe let you know that this needs to be done in your home, or you need to do 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Or it could be that maybe somebody is not they're having a spiritual problem, and that would be saying, no, the problem is this and this and this, and then for that specific problem, this is what you would need to do. So it almost reduces, the ritual almost reduces their anxiety about all these things that are not going well, but I'm not really sure why is it that things are not going well. I know that something is wrong, but I don't know what it is. And so it offers that for people. And I mean, water rituals for healing. It was another ritual that came across. And I must say that the people that I spoke to, it was a mixture of the clergy as well as the congregants. So like from the screen there, you can read, it says, when somebody is ill, we often bathe them with water and specific soaps. There's also, and this is somebody to say, there's also time for us to be taken to the water as people who are sick. And then there's another one who says that we heal people psychologically and in the flesh. We heal a person when they're physically sick. When they have a headache, a stomachache, we take water and mix with salt. We pray for the water and make the person drink so that they are healed. And so when you hear about this, you have to think about what is the significance of water rituals? What is that connection of people to water, right? And everything is centered around the cosmology. You need to be in harmony with the environment that you live in. And water for us is it's a purifying element, right? And it's the purity in water is believed to bring healing. But at the same time, people use water to get rid of ills, so to make themselves well. They use water as something to connect to the other side, right? And so you'll find that a lot of rituals in the church are centered around flowing water. Even the standard baptism, they have it in the river, so the water has to be flowing for that ritual to be connected in. So the significance is around what people associate water with. They associate with healing, they associate it with purity, and they associate it with something that they are able to connect to the other side too. And so when you think about the African cosmology, you start to realize that importance of the relationship between the person and their environment, because water and water bodies and rivers and so forth are natural things, right? They're in the environment that we live in. So if we're in harmony with the environment that we live in, then the environment can then be able to heal us. So yeah. And then this is one ritual, uklambulula, that I really had to dig deep and go into detail about it. Even in my pieces, I think Yaseen would see that maybe it must have been my favorite ritual. And uklambulula is a cleansing ritual at the basic, right? So it's a cleansing ritual. And so I look at uklambulula as an observance in the church as well as a process, right? So it's not like it's a ritual that you do it and that's it. So it's a process, and it takes from all these other rituals, and they together combined, it's this process of uklambulula. And so I look at it as you do a cleansing rituals, right? This was for spiritual growth. So the translation yet again does not do justice to the extract, but this is somebody who's a spiritual healer. And so what they're talking about there is that they were called, and for them to be healed. So they says that I had to go to the water to fetch my garment because I was supposed to fetch it from the water in order for me to be healed. If you look at that, you will take it from a context that maybe this person was sick. this person was not sick. It's a spiritual healer who's had to undergo training. So in order for them to mark the completion, if I can say completion, of their training, as well as the readiness for them to be of service to their society, they had to go to the water and do a cleansing ritual. And she says that I had to be the first one to enter the water. And then the people that were going to be cleansed followed. And I had to put my garment while I was in the water. And the significance of that whole process is that the garment is something that identifies you as a spiritual healer. And that is something that you wear when you're going to be, let's say you're going to be assisting somebody, you're going to be helping somebody, you wear that, right? And it's a cloth, so it's a worldly material. And in order for it to have the significance that it's supposed to be in, you need to take it back to the environment, right? So you need to go to the water to cleanse it. It's almost a spiritual rebirth, right? So you transfigure this garment for it to rid of it of the earthly impurities and signifies its spiritual magnitude. And by so doing so, you are saying to the community around you, you are saying that you are ready to be now of service to them, and you are now ready to heal your community. But you may not heal your community if you yourself are not healed. So that is why you have to start with the cleansing ritual. And this is a process that you continuously engage in. As we know, as human being, life happens, certain things happens to people. So now and again, you will find that they have to go back to the river to do the cleansing in order for them to be in alignment in terms of their spiritual standing. And I look at uKhlambulula as a collective responsibility. And this was highlighted by one person who said that the importance of uKhlambulula, of repenting in church, is that if there is somebody who's burdened in the church, either spiritually, psychologically, or emotionally, or physically, the people around them, they will also get burdened. So it becomes a must that you talk about it, so that the others can continue and not be burdened. And this person was speaking about uKhlambulula, or cleansing, in a sense that it is it's a standing item in the church service, that there's going to be the time that is allocated for the members of the congregation to state to the congregation whether they're feeling well physically, emotionally, or psychologically. And what that does is that it communicates. It communicates when one needs maybe assistance from the church, and it is during that process where one can ask to say, maybe I'm not feeling well emotionally, I'm not feeling well psychologically, I need assistance. Can I please request to have isiguqo, for example, or can I please request for a cleansing ceremony or something? So it is a platform that is created for the congregants to really communicate their well-being. And this signifies that the church, it acknowledges that well-being is a collective responsibility. So you need to be able to know the burden of others for you to be able to assist, because if the one is burdened and they're not saying anything, then you are also in turn burdened. And this goes back to what we spoke about, to say within the conceptualization of psychological well-being, they look at it in terms of in a relational manner, to say if one of us is burdened, then all of us are burdened. So in this case, I look at it as a social connection, to say it is a ritual that is connecting people, in that I'm able to say, at least I know if I share my burdens during this ritual, then there's other members maybe who might be going through the same thing, or who are not even going through the same thing, but they will be with me in my discomfort, or in my in what is burdening me. And then so what, which is something that you know, most people will ask with all of this. So what is it that we are saying? And we are being very we're being very cheeky with this study. And we are developing guidelines to integrate or religious practices, or just traditional practices, into psychological interventions. And I did say in the last slide, or in the last two slides, that I think I'm very obsessed with uklambulula. So I'm using uklambulula as a concept, right? And I'm proposing for it to be used as an epistemic tool, right, for psychology to really cleanse itself of the injustice that it has done to the Black people, to the injustice that it has done to the people that are not from you know, that are not Euro American, or I mean Europeans, if I may say that. It needs to cleanse itself of its practices, of its theories, and methods that are continuously perpetuating coloniality, as well as the injustice that was brought by coloniality. And it does that. It will do that, and it will be able to do that by firstly realizing those injustices, by firstly realizing the harm that it has done to the Black people, and then by actively working in terms of reimagining what it is that it has to offer the Black communities, right? And that is centering the context of African people, that is centering the voices of African people, that is centering their practices, that is centering their beliefs, as centering their ways of being, and instead of othering, because currently it's othering the African beliefs, it's alternating, it's alternative, the African beliefs, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo. So it will redress itself once it undergoes uklambulula. And that was what I managed to prepare for today. But there's definitely a lot of work that we are doing on this topic, but we can only prepare so much for a presentation. And thank you so much. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Thembeka. This is actually really quite informative, very, very informative. And I was listening to your presentation, and I'm thinking of a number of different questions, and I'm thinking of a number of different things. And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking about ritual and some of the practices is the quote often referred to by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, where he said, "The white man came to our land. They gave us their Bible and told us to close our eyes. When we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible." And I am interested in how and in the many ways in which, perhaps for survival, or perhaps for just simply accommodation to, just to be easy with the white man, the white colonialist when he occupied us, that we embraced his practices, his beliefs. And I'm interested in how were indigenous South African communities and tribes and peoples able to integrate the Western colonial religious beliefs, the Christianity, the churches in them, and how are they able to reconcile those? And I'm seeing comments also from Professor Thembeka and Professor Ally in the chat that talks about the deficiency and the deficiency in language. As Professor Thembeka said, it is an interesting and conversation-provoking presentation. For instance, Isuguko is very important. I'm just thinking of how do I express myself in English during this process. Well done. And Professor Ally concurred by saying, and that was one of my primary challenges with this and other studies I supervise, the translation to English and where meaning is being lost. Because when we think about some of your indigenous languages and how you speak in more, every word that you use has a story to it. It has a deeper meaning. It has a cultural reference point. That English in it, that word in English just cuts all of that out and comes with one harsh, very basic, simple translation, which does a gross disservice to the language, but also to the meaning and to the people that need to hear this, or the people that are listening. And so they'd be like, that is not what I said. That does not make sense. That does not quite express my thoughts or my feeling, or you're not representing me accurately. So I'm interested in how all of this is, how colonialism perhaps has impacted, contaminated, corrupted traditional practices, and how have, for survival, for accommodation, have traditional cultures and belief systems utilized colonialist practices as a way to transform and reach the same communities with the same message. Do you, I mean, that's a hell of a long question that just seems to ramble all over, right? But,
yes.
and nobody else, please don't laugh. But what are you thinking about that, Thembeka?
Yeah. They had to accommodate, or let me not say they had to, they were forced to accommodate, right? And that's why I spoke about the Zionist churches being syncretic in their approach, in that we're still gonna uphold your colonial beliefs and your ideology and the Christianity that you are teaching to us, but we're gonna do it in a manner that still we using our own practices in terms of being Christians, for example. So they had to accommodate for survival, and they had to find ways in which they still maintain their own practices. And you'll see that some of the practices, when we speak about some of the rituals and you try to get an understanding about where they stem from, that, and some of them were not really indigenous to the communities, but it's something that was brought onto them, and that's what we are trying to reimagine right now with the types of research that we're doing. We are trying to say, let us represent the authentic practices of our people, because even in 1980s, when maybe the research was done around traditional African beliefs, it was not done by the Black African. It was done by a white, a white man from the West, and so they've never really authentically represented us. That is why in the writings, they would, like, for example, when I was trying to explain Iskuko and the rhythm that goes on, I'm not doing justice when I'm saying it's dancing. It's not dancing, it's a spiritual, it's, I don't have the concept to explain it in the English language. So that's exactly what we're trying to do, to say and remember, with our traditions, a lot of our tradition practices and everything has been passed down generationally, orally, right? And it has never been written down. And so, I mean, you know, with communication from one generation to the other, it gets, you know, twisted along the way. And so we are now saying, let's document the African practices. And we realize that they've changed over time, and we account for that. But they might have changed in terms of how they are being conducted, but the meaning behind them still remains the same. And that is what we need to bring up, and we need to really authentically say, this is what this means to us.
I just have a follow-up question on that, is that as part of your presentation, you just talked about the ritual of cleansing in the river with putting on the cloth, the symbolism of putting on the cloth, the symbolism of being washed in the river. Is that indigenous to the African communities, or is that an appropriation or accommodation or assimilation with the Western biblical Jewish Judeo-Christian concept of baptism and washing and cleansing in a river? And the river is seen as a symbolic, as life-giving, as cleansing, as washing away. And so the concept of baptism, so we talk about in Judeo-Christian concept of the baptism of Jordan, of Jesus in the in the Jordan River, or John the Baptist, in the Jordan, and people today still traveling to Israel to go get themselves baptized in the Jordan River because it's relationship. So I wonder then how much of that concept that you introduced about cleansing and baptism and putting on a cleansing cloth, because in Christianity, in Catholicism, it is putting on a white garment at your baptism that symbolizes your purity, you're entering into Catholicism, into Christianity as a pure being, as a pure person. And how is that concept either indigenous to your communities or something that they have appropriated to make it make sense and accommodate and assimilate to show belonging or identification with the white colonialists? Does that make sense?
Yeah. With the church, I can only speak in the context of the church, right? And I can't generalize in terms of the whole African beliefs. But in terms of the Zionist church, yes, the baptism part of it, it is definitely according to the biblical prescriptions in terms of a river Jordan in the baptism. However, when you trace back to the African people and their relationship with nature, they've always used nature as a way of connecting to the other world, with the spiritual world, right? And so what I hadn't spoke about, for example, with Isugubo, it is something that can also be conducted ehlane, which is in the field. And the symbolism is that you are able to connect to the spiritual realm when you are in nature than when you are in the context of your own home, for example. So there is some form in terms of the context of the church. There is some appropriation in terms of what Christianity is telling them about baptism, but in terms of cleansing rituals and so forth, African people had been connected to their nature. They've used nature to connect to the spiritual realm. And that is the significance of having to go, of cleansing using natural sources like water, or even infusing some natural herbs, is that you are connecting with nature, and nature is connecting to the other world that you may not physically access as a person. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Thembeka. Wandile, Professor Tzembedze had his hand up for a while, but I also have some questions in the chat. Professor Tzembedze, would you like to ask your question? And then we will move to the questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Please forgive me for the background noise. Thembeka, you have done a very exceptional work, and also I love your presentation, and I've learned a lot from it today. But my question is not actually to you. You can share it for us and also share with, I know that there are other students who are here and they can relate to your work. But I just want to ask Professor Yaseen, based on the fact that he's been a seasoned supervisor when it comes to studies that are in the African context, whereby students need to write from the proposal until to the discussion. And these are, I'll give an example, Xhosa, Zulu, Pedi, Changan, all the 11 languages in South Africa. My question to Professor Yaseen is that how can he advise, what advice can he give to students to be able to express themselves and from proposal stage when they write? For example, how do a student explain Ubutwala in English? It doesn't make sense. I have a student that is trying to explain Ubutwala, Ubutwala, like carrying a girl and is being perceived as something that is it encourages GPV, but then now we will need to explain it in the African context. But the student is really, because of training, I don't blame them. They are not used to express themselves in their language. Because I say to him, write it in your language. What is Ubutwala? And also, Thembeka mentioned something that is very important, which says it doesn't do justice when you translate it. It loses the meaning. She mentioned something that is very important, whereby she said, it's not dancing. Skuko, I'm a Zion, Zion. And it's really not it's not dancing. It's another level of, I cannot even dancing. The people are in a certain realm of spiritual being, and they've transformed. So it's actually not dancing. So I'll speak a lot when it comes to this, but I just want to ask Professor Yaseen to say, how can he advise the students to be able to write freely in their language without fear, based on how they are trained, and also the fact that some of us are new supervisors in this African studies. How do we provoke this conversation and boldly so submit a thesis whereby, or a dissertation whereby, the person will just write Ulualugo in Xhosa and not even explain? There's no translation. Those are my two questions. Say, I'll boldly so send that work and there's no translation. So I'm just thinking in those lines. Thank you.
Thank you, Wandile. Thank you, Professor Tsabedze. Professor Ally?
Antoine, am I allowed to take the floor for a few minutes?
Yes, please go ahead, by all means.
Okay. Wandile, thank you for the question. I just want to firstly commend Thembeka on a fantastic presentation. She has a very beautiful way as a storyteller. And you would know that in various African traditions, storytelling is a way of carrying your culture and sharing our lived realities. So I just want to commend her on her way of presenting, and also to applaud her on her bravery for taking on a topic that really, as Wandile stated in his question, made her speak in her language and bring out her own voice through the study, right? And as a supervisor, I think I've always encouraged my students to do that, from the proposal right through to the final write-up in the examination phase, is not to be afraid of using your indigenous language in the text, in the literature review. Bring in, I even told Thembeka and some of my other students to draw on some of the stories that your grandmothers and grandfathers have told you, those folklore stories that you have, bring it into the literature review and then speak about it. I think the one thing we need to understand about writing from an African decolonial perspective, and that particular African-centeredness, Wandile, is that unfortunately, as it stands, we do not have enough literature that is present on African-centered, experiences and indigenous knowledge in South Africa, and its links to mental health. And number two, this is not translated into the therapeutic approaches and modalities that we are teaching our clinical and counseling and professional students. So invariably, we are very slowly turning the wheel in how we are producing knowledge, while the psychologists we are producing are not being produced contextually relevant with contextually relevant theoretical backgrounds, which is why when they get to their M2, their clinical training year 2, and they start seeing clients, we notice that they struggle when a client speaks to them about witchcraft or ulwaloko or, you know, amafufunyana or whatever these culture-specific experiences might be, because their training has limited their vocabulary to speaking about mental health, mental illness, and psychological well-being from only within a DSM-related discourse. And very, very, there are these small pockets, as you will know, across the country in South Africa at the master's level, where students are exposed predominantly to an African-centered psychotherapeutic approach that centralizes rituals and religio-cultural voices and approaches in its therapeutic perspective. So to answer your question, because I do apologize, I'm getting a bit carried away here by the energy in the room. But to answer your question, what I do with my students is to really, if you've got something to share in isiXhosa or Zulu, share it, but then also write in English why you are going to share this information. So with Thembeka's study, for example, because there isn't enough literature for us to use to support what we are saying, she's writing those experiences in isiXhosa. And then we are using, or we explain it in English, but we also very explicitly and critically indicate that there is meaning lost. Because like you said with the dance, it's loosely translated, Umoya is loosely translated to dance, but it's not. It's a very spiritual enactment and ritual. And the English language does not capture that. But we can get close towards trying to create a broader discourse by bringing African-centered languages into the way we write and examine our thesis. So Wandile, don't be afraid. I know you're saying that you're not seasoned as yet. I have supervised quite a number of students on this topic, and they've gone out for examination internationally as well. And international examiners too are very open to hearing and learning about these experiences, so long as we are able to explain it well enough. Now, I know that's a bit of a disjuncture, because I'm saying write in your language, but then also explain it. Not so much trying to unpack the traditional language and translate those words, but getting the reader to understand the difficulty in translation and how meaning is essentially lost. I hope I'm answering your question.
Thank you, Prof. You have.
Thank you very much.
But I'm willing to engage with you, and I'm willing to engage with you at a further point if you need for us to discuss things, Wandile.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you very much, Professor Ally and Professor Tsambedze. So let me just go back to a couple of questions, Thembeka. We have one question here that asks, your study is super interesting, Thembeka. My question to you relates to how some Christians argue that healing comes from praying God and God only. No materials needed. What would be your response when they suggest that syncretism is worshiping materials and doubting the power of God? And they continue. Yeah.
Okay.
Hang on, Thembeka, because we are now 9 minutes away from 11:30, and
Okay.
this conversation is seeming that it's loaded, it's heavy. We have a lot to talk about. So if Thembeka is available and you are all others available, we may continue for another 15 minutes after 11:30 when we're supposed to end, so that we can answer the questions. Or if not, then Thembeka can maybe answer the questions. We will record it and it will be up on the website so you can hear the responses. Go ahead with that response, Thembeka.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me see. I think it's Matsepo. You know, with me, I've gotten to a point where arguing, I don't. So I would be saying to each his own. That's just basically me, because what I'm not trying to do is to further explain myself, right? But if we are engaging on worshiping and materialism and so forth, I'm willing to engage on that conversation. But when I see that the line of discussion is in a manner that is saying that what I believe is more truer than what you believe, then I don't try to correct or to justify myself in that. I can try to explain what syncretism is and what it means from my perspective, and put that across. And at the end of the day, we have to realize that reality is subjective. So what I understand and what you understand can never be 100% similar. And nobody's truth is more truther, if I can say, than the next person. So I always gauge in terms of the line of engagement. Are we engaging on this because we want to have a robust discussion and actually tighten up our what we think about issues? Or are we having this discussion because I want to say what I believe is more dominant to that which you believe in? Then if it's the second one, I don't give it a minute of my time. That's just myself, and that's a personal thing. That's a personality thing for me. But if we are engaging and we're saying that let's try to understand each other, then I'm open to that. It's similar to, for example, the issue of people saying that worshiping ancestors. We don't worship ancestors, and I can teach somebody when I'm saying that I'm speaking to my ancestors, or this is what I can teach what it means to me. But if that person is not open towards learning other people's realities, but they more inclined in terms of asserting their dominance in terms of what their way of being is, then I really don't entertain that, and that's a me thing. So that will be me. The line of engagement, if we are engaging because we're saying let's understand each other and let's see let me learn what your thinking and your belief is and what it means to you and how you perceive it, then I'm open to having that conversation. Yeah, I don't know if maybe that answers the question, but yeah.
Thank you, Thembeka. I have a question here. There's a question here from Paul. What is the perception of ritual as a part of psychological healing process in South Africa?
It's as you can imagine what psychology perceives about rituals and or indigenous healing methods. That's why we're having these studies to actually explain what ritual is. But it's not very well received because, as I said, psychology depends on things that they can observe or they can measure. But with more African scholars, or with more South African scholars now, speaking about indigenous healing methods and speaking about rituals and what they mean in terms of psychological healing, there is some work being done in that area. But I think psychology is closed across the globe. It's not very receptive of that which it deems alternative. So from the standpoint of psychology as a profession, there's still a long way to go in terms of getting an understanding of ritual being part of psychological healing process. So
Thank you, Thembeka, because one of the things that comes to mind, what you've just done today is linked two aspects. You, hold on a second. there was a lot of background noise. A helicopter was passing over and a truck was passing on the street. So I didn't want that kind of background noise to influence or to corrupt what I was saying. There are two things that have come up, and you've been able to show a link between our presentation that Ottawa did on August 7th. Because in that discussion, we talked about permission in psychology, that there is, asking for permission to be able to talk about indigenous or ritual practices as a part of psychology. What you're introducing today to us is measurement within psychology, and that the inability, I think, to be able to measure scientifically or realistically, as far as psychology is concerned, traditional practices. And how then do we then incorporate, if it can't be measured, if it can't be captured and tracked and data collected, how do we then incorporate ritual and practices in contemporary psychology? And where do we find that fusion? But that's a much more larger philosophical question. And I just wanted to point out that observation, the link between what you're doing today and what was presented on August 7th. We have an observation from Bukola Ahimle from Nigeria, who is saying that this is very interesting. I'm glad to be part of this. I would like to encourage some of my PhD students in my university to look at this from Nigerian perspective. Well done. There's another question here. Machepo Letsualo said, thank you again, Thembeka, for the good presentation. I would like to ask again, the argument with neo-Pentecostal Christianity is that the dead are dead. There is no particular reason to reference the dead when it comes to healing. Without trying to convince anyone otherwise, how would you make it make sense to someone who is in between African traditional religion and charismatic Christianity? And she continues by saying, lastly, since spirituality cannot be seen with the human eye, how can one discern when the healing is meant to harm? Like, how can one protect themselves? Because there are some charlatans, fake healers, who are chancers.
Trying to convince anybody otherwise, number one, we don't do that. We don't convince people to think otherwise about. I think I'm over having to explain and convince people. So in terms of the belief about the dead are dead, yet again, it goes back to what we believe about the dead and how we conceptualize those that are dead. And like, for example, for somebody like myself, I believe in the living dead. And so if I believe in the living dead, then I'm going to not be inclined to say that the dead are dead. There's no particular reference to them, because those are the people that have lived before me. And I know that they exist beyond the physical realm, and they are living in the spiritual realm. And that's my own understanding and belief around that. So if you have somebody who's totally opposite in terms of belief, you don't try to convince them to get into or to align with your belief, but you can teach them about your belief and what it means to you as a human being, what it means to you to be somebody who believes in the living dead, and that's all that from a human level. That's what you can do. Of course, I know when it comes to research and writing, you have to be more engaged in terms of how you tackle this issue. And it always goes back to how does a person view their reality, right? So if a person who's neo-Pentecostal is viewing reality in that the dead are dead, and the person who's more African religion inclined is saying that there is the living dead. How do we navigate these diversities between these two people, but you know, still reach maybe the same goal of getting to a point where people are being well? I think for me, it goes back to how are we engaging about issues? Are we engaging on issues from a... Sorry, yes?
Sorry, can I jump in to help you, because it's a debate that we've been having, Antoine and colleagues. If you don't mind, I just want to talk, because the question raised about the neo-colonial framing, I think this is a very important thing. How has that, you know, where there's some Pentecostal churches that don't have the belief in, you know, the living dead, the dead are the dead, for example, and other churches in South Africa that do have this in Africa. And one of the debates that we are looking at, especially with Odwa's study, is to look at what is the truncation on the African mind that has taken place with the introduction of monotheistic religious ideas in Africa. So with the introduction of Christianity, for example, there was a truncation on African thinking and traditions, and you'd find that, you know, witchcraft was considered to be a black magic. And you get the witch hunts that suddenly took place across Africa, similar to what took place in Europe, with the European witch hunts during the advent of, you know, colonialism and religious domination. You find that these pagan belief systems and other systems were truncated upon. And with the introduction then of Christianity as the dominant ideology, we find that African persons have probably, and cultures and communities have attempted to maintain their traditions and cultures, but still holding on to what was given to them and what was imposed onto them, which is that Christianity belief. So that's why you find that in some churches, like the ZCC, there is this intersection and integration of both the spiritual and supernatural, along with what is considered Christian, which is very polarized in ways, because other Christian denominations would not agree with how African cultural traditions and beliefs have been integrated with Christianity, where there's a duality, the influence of God, Jesus Christ, and the ancestors. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Ally. Thembeka, just so we are at 4 minutes past time. If people still want to remain, I just want to read the last comment from Paul. We should not feel obligated to explain our language or culture in European terms. And then Paul adds again, Europeans are the only peoples who believe the dead are dead. Most indigenous cultures connect ancestors to the living. Are there any other thoughts, comments, questions that people would like to offer? Otherwise, then we should, unless Thembeka, you have anything else you'd want to add to follow up on this, or to follow up with what Professor Ally was talking about, and then we can close out.
No, I don't have any follow-up. I think Professor Ally has summed it up very nicely. The issue of you know, the different beliefs. But thank you so much. I think this was very engaging for me. I was, yeah, I thought that it was going to end much earlier, but I can see that you know, the engagement was really good. So that's just it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thembeka. And so we'd like to know what you thought about this webinar by scanning the QR code below and completing the evaluation. You can visit us at dbgm.org, at yanathefilm.com, the In My Mind conference.com, or the ancestralinstitute.com for more information about who we are and the work that we are doing. So we've already had the questions and answers. Coming up on September 30th is Ancestral Calling and its role on psychological well-being amongst the Pedi tribe, that is going to be presented by Isandri Mabotacha. So this is again is at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, New York, or Atlantic Time, or 5 o'clock, 17 hours South African time. As I said, that this webinar series is leading up towards the Ancestral Institute in Puerto Rico, where we are looking at and we are gathering to look at cultural gathering for holistic health and wellness, uniting indigenous and diasporic practices in both English and Spanish. So you can scan the QR code to begin to register again for the webinars. You can see on this flyer the different departments and the different entities that are co-hosting and co-sponsoring the Ancestral Institute. Thank you very much, and for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you. We look forward to welcoming you on the 30th of September. I think I saw another comment here. So those who need to engage me can contact me at Thembeka Sdinane. Thank you, Thembeka, wonderful presentation. A drink a symbol. Nekon Konso symbolizes human relations. We are linked in both life and death. Those who share blood relations never break apart. So Wandile said we wanted more. So thank you for everyone for the Ancestral Institute for hosting this informative session. So thank you guys very much, and we look forward to welcoming you on the 30th of September. Please register, and we will see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thembeka.
Thank you, Antoinette.